people think they have a communication problem. What if the real issue is they don't even know how to lead themselves? Because if you can't trust your own voice, you're not going to use it when it actually matters. Today's conversation is going to challenge how you think about confidence, leadership, and what it actually takes to speak up in a world that rewards noise but punishes uncertainty. Welcome back to Speaking with Confidence, the podcast that helps you build the soft skills that lead to real results. Communication, storytelling, public speaking, and showing up with confidence in every conversation that counts. I'm Tim Newman, a recovering college professor turned communication coach, and I'm thrilled to guide you on a journey to becoming a powerful communicator. Today's guest is Chip Scholz. Chip describes himself as a man with a lathe, a pocket knife, and a few stories. Over the course of a long career in business and coaching, he's come to see that the moments that shape a life rarely arrive with fanfare. They show up quietly, in family conversations, unexpected detours, and even in a woodshop, shaping a piece of maple. His work explores how those small moments accumulate over time, changing how we see, how we live, and eventually what we're willing to let go of. Those reflections come together in his book, Every Dog Has Its Day, a collection of stories about life, craft, and the decisions that quietly shape who we become. Chip, welcome to Speaking with Confidence, bud.
Hey, thank you, Tim. I'm so glad to be here.
You know, I love, first and foremost, the first thing you say, you're a simple man with a lathe, a pocket knife, and a few stories. What did a wood lathe teach you about patience and craft and attention and working with your hands?
Well, I have to go a little further back than when I picked up the lathe. It's interesting you talk about speaking with confidence, and we'll get to the self-leadership part later. I've been speaking, I've been speaking my whole life, but I've been speaking in public since seventh grade when I was in a play, and right. Had to get up on stage and talk in front of my parents, which was even tougher than anything else. But going forward, I got into my own business, and I was working unbelievable hours, and I'm traveling a lot. 200 nights a year in a hotel, and I had a stroke. And it was pretty devastating. I only had one woe is me moment. I only had one time when I asked God, why did this happen? But what came out of that is about a year later, my wife gave me a lathe for Christmas, and there's even a backstory to that. My mother-in-law, who was a dear woman, I loved her to death. She died 12 days shy of 98.
Oh wow!
She died in my easy chair in my wife's arms. And she always bugged me. She was a crafty person. She loved doing crafts. She did theorem painting. She did these incredible metal trays, and she just did everything, knitted and crocheted and all that kind of stuff. And she always wanted to be useful. She wanted to know that I had a hobby. Before the stroke, I didn't.
Right.
And so I found the lathe, and I just took to it, and it was, maybe it was a 30-pound chunk of spinning wood that wanted to take my head off, or maybe it was the body movements or whatever it was. But it changed me in some interesting ways, and made me learn about wood and the surprising qualities of wood, and how wood reacted to different things, and how different species were all different. And slowly but surely I started relating that to a lot of the stuff I did.
Yeah. Well, it really does make sense. Again, I don't know a lot about wood, but I do know when you pick up two different pieces of wood, they feel different. They could be the same length, they could be the same width, but one's heavier, one's lighter, one has a different shade. It's not really unlike people, and how you mold wood is how different individuals are molded on a daily basis as well.
Well, one of the things that I talk about is forcing the cut. And what I mean by forcing the cut is with turning wood, you use tools that are extremely sharp, and they have to be sharpened all the time. And they're made out of high-speed steel or some kind of a steel hybrid, and you have to keep them really sharp. if they don't, you end up having to spend a lot more energy in moving those tools through the wood, and you end up forcing the cut, which leads to some really bad results. They have this thing called tear out, where you get all these pebbly, kind of a pebbly surface finish, and nobody likes that. I mean, nobody wants to feel a rough bowl. They want to feel a smooth bowl. You know, my wife calls it feeling like a baby's behind, and you know, she says, "Oh God, that's so smooth." So you know, if you force the cut, it leads to a tired craftsman and bad results. Yeah. And it's the same thing as with people. If you're forcing the cut, if you're tired, if you're just trying to muddle through, if you're being inauthentic, that's really difficult.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about leadership. You know, when we had our pre-interview meeting, you said something that has really kind of stuck with me, right? And as I was doing some reading today, it just so happened that one of the things that was written in what I was reading was you can't lead others until you lead yourself. And it's just kind of funny how that happened this morning as I was doing my reading, but most people hear that and they nod, yeah, you're right. Yeah. But they have no idea what it really means. So let's kind of start there. And where do people get this concept completely wrong?
Well, first of all, they don't really understand what it is. And there's another term that we use that they don't really understand either. And that's being authentic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And if you can't lead yourself, you're not authentic. So all kinds of leadership books, harangue you about being authentic, and they never really tell you what authentic is.
Right.
It's like those great concepts. I know, it's like I had an old coaching client of mine say to me, this guy is just not strategic. And I said, well, what does that mean? He said, I don't know, but I'll know it when I see it. So so many concepts are, I'll know it when I see it. We know somebody's authentic when we see they're authentic, but how do we understand being authentic? Well, being authentic is knowing how to lead yourself. Well, knowing how to lead yourself is, well, do I know what I want?
Right.
I can tell you 100 things that I don't want, but can I tell you the 10 things that I do? And I don't know whether it's fear of missing out or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But most people have a really hard time telling you what they want. Most people have a really hard time acknowledging where they are. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's external. It may be, like I do a lot of 360s for a client of mine. And do you know what a 360 is?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I do a lot of 360s, and wow, it's probably the first time that most of these people have ever gotten feedback like that from people around them. I mean, stuff that people have actually said. So we're not really honest with ourselves. We right. have this picture in our mind of who we are. So we're not taking advantage of our context and knowing what we are. So understanding where we are, understanding what we want, getting our minds right, making those behavioral choices to do something different, and then, it's living, it's walking the walk, it's walking,
yeah.
It's walking the talk.
Yeah, let's talk about the 360 for a minute here, because to me that's something it's critical to do, but you have to be in a good headspace to participate in it, because you're going to get feedback on yourself, and you have to be actually open to hearing that. Is that something that you're the people that you're working with have trouble actually getting in that headspace to hear and truly accept the criticism or praise or whatever it is for what it is, and not take it so personal?
Well, okay, so most of I don't do a 360 like most people do. I do more of an executive evaluation. So I use an electronic survey, okay, but I also back it up with interviews, and I use assessments, and I write a report rather than giving them the raw data, because out of 25 people that are rating them, you'll always get one that says this person is a fink, and what are you going to focus on? You're going to focus on that one person who said you were a fink, and the 25 people that said you were great. That's going to be tougher. So I do it in a slightly different way. And so what I do is I say, okay, here's what the strengths are. Here's what the weaknesses are. I would say out of the probably 400 or 500 of the 360 that I've done over the years, there's very few people that are surprised.
Okay.
I would say so there's a difference between companies too. Like the company that I do most of them for, they do not weaponize the 360s.
Right. Okay. Makes sense.
I did work for a company that weaponized them. I did a lot of work for a company that weaponized, and what they were doing is they were out to get somebody, and they wanted to have justification for getting out to somebody. This other company that I work with is it strictly uses 360s for development and making you better. So I would say that most of the time people aren't surprised. They might be surprised about the nuance, but not always the substance. The ones that are surprised are probably not long for for being around, and they're going to self-select out. It's not that they're going to get selected out, because again, it's for their development. But they decide that the work isn't worth the price or whatever. So.
That's interesting, and I do like the whole idea of not weaponizing that a 360, because again, I primarily come from the education background, but I have worked in business. But especially in education, everything is weaponized, and you're never really given an opportunity to grow or get better, or given any tools to grow or get better. It's nobody tells you anything, then you get this evaluation, and they don't really do 360s at all. But when you can sit around and get feedback from peers and colleagues and people above you, people below you, and really get an idea of what you're doing and what you're not doing to make yourself better, that to me is what real growth should and companies should be doing and helping their employees.
Yeah, and so that most of my coaching interactions start with the 360, because that's a great way of understanding context. That's a great way of understanding where we're starting, and then we know where we got to go. And so I work with a lot of high potentials, people that are maybe manager or director and are being looked at for VP, and there's the importance of the 360 is not what it says about your past.
Right.
The importance of the 360 is what's going to be important about you in the future. And so it's framed in a little different way. It's instead of saying naughty, 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 you did this, it's like, hey, this is what people are saying about you. And so you have a choice. You have a choice to do something about that. And, oh, by the way, do some of the things that are strengths or areas of development, are those pertinent to your next position and your next position and your next position? And that's really how it works, is that we're going to coach on those things that are important to you.
Right. And that's so important. And dealing with those high level or high potential individuals, what's something that separates the ones who lead themselves from the ones who just kind of pretend to do that?
You know them. You know what they're like, because their words don't follow their actions. They do a really poor job of giving their word and keeping it. They do a poor job of personal accountability. One of my favorite movies, and it's an old movie, but I'm sure everybody's seen it, is Office Space. And when you think of Lumbergh, the boss, and think how he is. I mean, he's the perfect person for lack of accountability, and he's about as transparent as they come, in a bad way. And so I think we laugh about it a lot. Most of comedy is about people that have an amazing lack of self-awareness, like Michael Scott in The Office or that kind of thing. And we know when people are People are faking it. And look, we all go through imposter syndrome, right? I mean, we all do that. And imposter syndrome leads to some bad behaviors because you want to be seen as something rather than who you are, So, that's that cognitive dissonance that happens.
Yeah. And we've all been in those situations. And I think one of the things that makes it so funny as well is we've been in those situations. We've seen a real Lundberg, we've seen a real Michael Scott, either in our own organization or work for somebody like that. And when you see it to that extreme, I think that's what makes those two in particular so successful. Those movies, but movies and TV show. But it's you mentioned a couple things: not keeping your word, not following through, and not taking accountability. To me, those are the first things that lose respect and lose you leadership right from the get go.
Yeah.
And it doesn't. You can be really good and slip up one time, and you're going to spend forever trying to make up for it. So if you're going to say you're going to do something, please just do it, and then own whatever you did or did not do.
That's right.
As well.
That's right. That's right. And it's interesting you talk about speaking with confidence or communicating. That's the basis of the podcast. So many times our communication gets in the way of keeping our word. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, think about the questions you ask. So if you are all the time asking why questions, why questions are blame questions. Who gives a damn why things happen? It's like, let's get it fixed and let's get moving. I mean, blame is for academics, right?
Right.
Because there's probably a good bit of it that goes around, or yes. Government, or and so if I'm asking what or how question, if I'm asking really great questions, I'm going to be seen as more credible. Mm-hmm. And then when you're right, it's saying yes or no. I mean, so many people have a difficult time saying yes or no, and the word they use all the time is try. If I hear somebody say, I'll try to do that, do I think they're going to do it? If I invite you over to dinner on Saturday night with, ask you and your wife to come over for dinner, and you say, I'll try to be there, am I going to buy the steaks?
No, not happening. Nope.
Yeah. So it is all about language. It's all about the language you use and all about the language that we mean.
Yeah. Again, it's funny as you bring this up. I had a meeting Monday night, and somebody needs something done. And before I had all the information, I said, oh, "Yeah, I'll do that. I can do that." And I didn't have all the information, and I started working on it. And I was supposed to have another meeting on Tuesday afternoon. It's a regular standing meeting, and I had to call the person. I said, "Look, I need to cancel this meeting because I said yes to something without having all the information." And I really have to get it done. So again, that's my point here is if you're going to say you're going to do something, you've got to do whatever you need to do to get it done, and then take ownership of it. So like that standing meeting, it was an accountability meeting that I have with this person every other Tuesday. That's what we do. At 4:30, we have an accountability meeting with each other, and so I had to. That's part of it. Own the things that you say, own the things that you do, and move on.
Yeah. And that's all leads to authenticity.
Yeah.
You can't be authentic if you, and it's like, I have a client that I've known for 25 years. He's been at 3 different companies that I've worked with. And, he knows, that if I say I can do something, I can. And if I can't, I'm going to tell him. Right. And that's so important. And, it was funny. I sent him a note a while back and said something about, it was, I can't remember what it was about, but he took it to mean that I couldn't do something. And I wrote him back and I said, have I ever turned work down? And he said, no, you haven't. And I said, well, just remember that.
Exactly.
I have never turned work down.
So let's take that a step further now. What changes in how you communicate when you shift from doing leadership to actually being a leader? Because that example right there is a perfect example.
Tim, that is a great thing, because that's what I talk about, is that moving from leadership to, or moving from individual contributorship to leadership, is moving from doing to being.
Right.
And the way I talk about it is doing. We're valued our whole lives for what we do.
Right.
If you think about, getting good grades in school and in our jobs, especially the first couple of jobs, we're judged by what we do.
Right.
And when I look at some of the CEOs that I work with, and with some of the executive staffs that I work with, you can always tell the people that are doers or the people who have become something else. And what it is, look, if I'm the CEO of a company, I shouldn't worry about having to move boxes or pounding nails or that kind of stuff. That's not my worry. My job is to set the cultural direction of the company and to watch the financials and make sure we're getting the best talent we possibly can. Those are all being kind of things. They're not doing things. It's becoming valued for who you are. And if you are not, if you're not conducive, so one of the old CEOs that I worked with, and this is something that I talk about quite a bit, is a guy that grew to believe his own BS, and that's something that shows up as inauthentic as all the time.
Right.
When the story that's being told is not the story that he's telling. And it just, he started to believe his own press. He started to believe his own PR machine. And pretty soon, he thinks he's the best thing since sliced bread. Oh, and then he gets popped for a DUI, or then, he's seen around town with a woman that's not his wife, and things like that. And it's like, well, wait a second. What I'm seeing in public is not squaring with the image that you're trying to put out.
Right. Now, I'm sure you didn't have any of those types of moments in your life, but was there a moment in your life where you had to make that shift yourself? And how did that go, and what was it like for you?
It didn't happen until I got into my own business.
Yeah.
And when I look at my career, I spent most of my career in sales or sales management, a little bit in operations management, and I was a lobbyist for 10 years before I got into my own business. But it was when, it was. So if I look back at the first 10 years that I was in business, I was just trying to keep up.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't doing the reading. I wasn't doing the things that I needed to do to stay on top of just reading ahead of what your clients are reading. So you can sit down and have a conversation about that, and they mention a book and you say, "Oh yes, I've read that," and actually mean it.
Right.
So it wasn't until about 10 years in that I started, I started doing the homework. Well, it was about 5 years in when I started doing the homework. I started, I had a coach and did all the things that I've been telling people to do forever, but hadn't been doing.
That's so interesting. 'Cause I talk about reading and writing a lot, and how important reading is. First off, how important writing is, but also how important reading is. And we don't read today like we used to read. Most of the reading happens, on our phones, in quick 2 or 3 paragraphs, and that's it. And I think we've really kind of unless you're intentional about reading, and I'm talking about reading books, I'm not talking about reading something on the news
Articles
on your
or
phone.
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm talking about actually reading books. Unless you're intentional about it, you're really falling behind, because the 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 people that are getting ahead, the leaders are actually reading. They're reading and they're writing and they're speaking. So you've to be a good speaker, you have to be a good reader. To be a good reader, you got to be a good writer as well.
That's absolutely true. You know, the scary stat that I heard a couple of years ago, and I can't remember where I heard it, but 57% of college graduates never finish another book from cover to cover in their entire lives.
And Chip, that doesn't surprise me. I mean, if that's accurate, it would not surprise me at all. And I say this just from the perspective of trying to get them to read while they're in school, while they're in college. And I get it. Trying to read a textbook is not fun, but there's certain things when you become a professional. There's certain things that you have to do whether you like it or not. And when it comes to reading leadership books or sales books or self-help books or whatever it is that you want to do, even reading a biography, right? Because I like reading biographies of obviously of people, but those things help your mind. Those things help you think. Those things help so many different aspects of your life, and it's become a lost art, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Do you read Ron Chernow at all?
No.
If you get a chance, one of the best business books that I've ever read is not a business book; it's a biography, and it's Titan: The Story of John D. Rockefeller.
Oh wow! Okay.
And the reason I found that book is it was on a list of 10 books that Bill Gates recommends you read, and I love Chernow anyway. Chernow is one of the most prolific authors and writes incredible biographies. I think the first one he wrote was The House of Morgan, talking about J.P. Morgan, and I've read everything he's written. And he's gotten stronger and stronger as he goes. He's not a lightweight. You know, it's about 900 pages that his average book weighs in. So, you know, it's not light reading. But God, he wrote one of the best biographies of Washington that I ever read. Wow. And so you're right. I just, you know, I love reading. So, you know, on my website, if you go to What's Chip Reading, there's about 140 books there that I've read that have reviews that I've done and have written about, and that gives you a good idea of some leadership books to read. So anyway,
so are you a physical book reader or like a Kindle electronic?
So I used to read physical books. Mm-hmm. And then I had a stroke in 2012, and after the stroke, I could not cognitively handle the reading, okay. And so it took me about a year to get back to reading, and I started listening to audiobooks.
Yeah,
and recently, within the last 2 years, I've found physical books again. You know, one of the cool parts about being in podcasts is a lot of podcast hosts have books, and so I swap books with them, and so I've really had the opportunity to read some pretty incredible books that wouldn't been available in audiobook. So I've gotten back to reading physical books.
Wow, that's interesting from the perspective of, you know, I didn't think about it from the stroke and not being able to do that, but I've just kind of newly adapted a new style. So like, I don't carry physical. I read on the Kindle, and then a lot of times what I'll do is I'll read it, then I'll listen to the audiobook, and then sometimes I'll go back and listen and read at the same time. You know, especially the ones that I really want to dive into, and because I spend a lot of time in the car as well, so being able to, you know, switching up from listening to podcasts to listening to some of the books I've read has given me a little bit more deeper understanding of some things, and It's interesting because for me, when I listen to a podcast as I'm driving, sometimes I lose focus. But when I'm listening to the book, after I've read it, I don't lose that focus.
It's funny. My process is similar in that I listen to the audiobook, and if I like the book, then I'm going to use it. So I use it in classes and other stuff. I'll buy the hardcover or I'll buy the book, the physical book, and read it that way. But I think that's so you want to use as many learning modalities as you can, right. And having that physical book and actually having to flip pages and hold on to the book, you get the kinesthetic, you get the visual, and then when you throw an audio book, you've got the audio as right. well, and so that really covers all the modalities of learning.
Let's talk about one of your frameworks that kind of revolves around the 5 C's. Can you walk us through what they are and tell me?
Yeah, I already started with that. Yeah. And it's context, clarity, conditioning, choice, and character. So context is knowing who you are and knowing what you're doing. It's understanding who you are as a physical person, as a mental person, as a spiritual person. Clarity is being certain in no uncertain terms what you want. And like I said, most people don't know what they want, or most people know what they don't want, but they don't know what they want. So it's taking the time to understand that. Conditioning is getting your mind right. It's changing your mind to do the things that you need to do. Like, I lost a lot of weight after the stroke, 110 pounds. And all of a sudden, I had to go from somebody who thought of himself as husky to somebody that was thin, and it was a big change in the way that I was thinking about eating and exercise and all that kind of stuff. So that was getting my mind right. Choice is I have this thing called a waypoint sheet. A waypoint sheet is something that's written, aligned, yours. Planned, optimistic, newsworthy, and trackable. That is a planning document for how to plan out the things that you want. So it's taking your thoughts and moving them into behaviors. And then character is just all the things we talk about. It's it's walking the talk. It's giving your word and keeping your word. It's the personal accountability that counts.
Yeah. It's so important. But if we're looking at Gen Z, what's their biggest blind spot right now?
I have to say that I used to think that talking about the generations was so cool, and that it was a great way to define people and define groups of people. And along about 10 years ago, I decided to stop that because so we have different things that we live through. I mean, most of Gen Z has no living recollection of 9/11.
Right.
And I remember when Kennedy was shot. So there's a huge delta between our lived experiences. But I still remember back when millennials were a thing, when everybody was talking about millennials this and millennials that. And there was an article that said millennials are not going to buy homes. And I said at the time, a 25-year-old is not going to buy a home. A 25-year-old doesn't have a reason to buy a home. When the 25-year-old turns into a 30-year-old with a wife and 2 kids, they're going to buy a home. And sure enough, that's what they did.
That happened. Right.
So some of the things that they talk about Gen Z with, some language and calling people skibbity or, that kind of stuff. Hey, we all have our thing, right?
Right.
We were told to turn our music down because we were listening to the Stones too high. But we're going to grow and we're going to learn and we're going to get past it, and we're going to have to get to all of the responsibility taking that we can. Mm-hmm. What's more interesting to me is there were a couple of books. One was called Pendulum. Another
Yeah.
one was called the Fourth Turning. Generations. Strauss and Howe wrote those two books, and they talked about how there are trends in Western society. And actually, Eastern society is opposite of Western society. But the way the pendulum described it is the 80-year cycle, which they call the sacrum, which is basically a human life, and the 20-year cycles within the 80-year overall cycle, and how things change in this 20 years. And right now, according to the authors, we're in the worst 20 years of the entire 80-year cycle. So so many things that we see are maybe not generational, but are because we're in that cycle. So there's all kinds of ways to explain it. And I'll be happy to send you. I did a paper on that a couple of years ago, and I'll be happy to send that to you if you like.
Yeah,
Just because it's pretty fascinating to think about. Okay, when you take a look, all of the major wars have been fought in the 80-year cycle.
Yeah.
And we're about due for a major war. So, go back to the Civil War, that was 80 years ago. Go back to the Revolutionary War, that was 80 years ago. And so there are certain events that just tie in with that. And, is it a coincidence? Is it somebody that just kind of made stuff up and it made sense? I don't know, but it made sense to me.
Yeah. Well, I read Pendulum, and that, to me, that was a fascinating book. And bringing it up, just now, you're absolutely right. I didn't think about it from the generational perspective. When I'm a little bit younger than you, and I know when I was growing up, I was told you don't ask questions. You're told to do something, you do it, and you just do it, right? And now, well, I never followed. I always ask questions. I mean, I've always been that one that's caused trouble. But when I look at Gen Z and the shifts that I had to make in my career as a college professor, they were the ones that probably challenged me the most, because when I realized that most at that point, unless you were a non-traditional student, you weren't alive when 9/11 happened, right? And then COVID happened, and the social skills, and maybe it was the same when we were that age too, that we didn't have real good social skills or communication skills, but the number of questions that they ask, to me is something that is really different from any other generation that I've taught. Just put it that way.
I was watching Parenthood the other night. Remember those movie with Steve Martin,
Yeah.
and so it was talking about kids back in the day, and one of the kids kept the door locked and wouldn't leave their room. And has that changed?
No.
You get a teenager and they want to be left the hell alone. Here's a kind of an interesting take on it. Is look, they'll be fine. They'll figure it out. They'll work it out. And it's like the old statement: if you're not a liberal when you're young, you have no heart, and if you're not a conservative when you're old, you have no brain.
Yeah, no brain.
So
Right.
so it's and I'm not getting political, so don't flame with
You're
the
good.
hate mail, but it's like that. It's we change. And the 20-year-olds now, when they get to be 70, are going to be a whole lot different. But think about the people that are 70 now, or 70 or 80.
Yeah.
We are the ones who are going to change the world, by God. We were the ones who were protesting the war, and we were the ones that said down with the man and all that kind of stuff. And somewhere along the line, we became the man.
Became the man, right? Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. You talk about teenagers and being in the rooms. So I've got grandkids, and The oldest is 6, and she's got a brother who's 4, and that's what they do to each other. Get out of my room at 6 and 4. I'm like, you gotta be kidding. I just laugh. You know, my granddaughter said she was, playing. She says, "Pops, I got a TV in my room." I was like, "Really? Your mom let you have a TV in your room at 6?" "Yeah, I go in there, I go in my room, watch TV when I'm bored or when I don't want to put up with my annoying brother." Yeah, she does not. A 6-year-old does not have a TV in her room, so it's not happening.
Think about it, Tim.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many people that make so much money off of differences.
Mm-hmm.
If I can exploit a difference, then I have an edge, and I'm going to get more likes on social media, and I'm going to piss somebody off. I was in the supermarket the other day, and the person behind the counter said, "Did you get everything you need?" And I said, "Well, I got everything I needed, but I'm not sure I got everything I wanted." and then I said the Sheryl Crow line, which is it's not having what you want, it's wanting what you got. And I said to her, I said, "What do you want?" And she said, "I want world peace." And I said, "I just want peace for myself."
Oh, yeah.
And she said, why do you say that? And I said, "I can control that. I can't control the world."
Right.
So look, we've got a lot of dream busters and sad makers that are all over the world that are just telling us about all these divisions and why it should matter to us and why it should piss us off.
Yeah. So are you noticing that you do a ton of podcasts, and are you noticing that's how one of the traits about how people are communicating right now?
That's a great question. I think some of the more topical podcasts are heading that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think you're going to gain mass market popularity by pissing people off.
Right.
I think when you get rattled around the echo chambers, yes, you probably do. And I don't care whether it's conservative, liberal podcasters, if they're playing to the base and if that's all they're looking for. But like a podcast like Smartless, I don't know what the politics of the 3 guys, Jason Bateman, Will Arnett, and Sean Hayes. I don't know what the politics of those guys are. And they have great guests on, and they have great conversations. So, it just depends on what rabbit hole you want to go down.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because as I'm coaching people and former students, I kind of talk about that a lot, especially if they're trying to apply for a job or they're trying to grow a business or whatever. Why would you talk about something that is going to alienate half the people, right? To me, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I say, if you just go on my social media, I don't talk about politics. I don't talk about religion. If you're in my inner circle, we talk about it or what have you, but I'm not putting that out there for anybody else. There's no real room for discussion. There's no room for nuance. There's no room for true understanding. So why would I want that out there? And why would you, who you're trying to get a job or start a business or grow a business or whatever it is, put something out there that is going to inflame people?
Well, because they feel like it's going to pay. They feel like that they get a lot more clicks if they do it this certain way. And we've all seen examples of that. Some of these influencers that are just influencing some of the things that they say is just like, my God, can't believe you're saying that. But you gotta question your motives too.
Yes.
And I don't think there's a great deal of self-awareness in people if they're not willing to question their motives. And speaking of communication, self-awareness is a huge part of communication.
Yes.
Because you've got to ask yourself if you are speaking that way, if you're out to piss people off, then what are you running from, or what are you running to? And really is, what are you running from to that leads you to some of these conversations?
Right.
I mean, if if fame is the only reward, well, there's a lot of ways to get famous, you know.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah,
You
go
know,
out,
and
go out and steal a tank and drive it down the main street of any town, USA, and you'll become famous for a minute.
that's it. It used to be 15 minutes. Now it's a minute. It's all
Yeah,
you
it
get.
is. It is.
And
yeah.
you know, I look at the whole idea of self-awareness as kind of as more of a confidence problem than a communication problem. I mean, I think it ties in, but
How so?
well, just from the whole idea of if you don't know who you are or what you believe, and you're trying to fit a mold or be something that you're not, that comes through in your communication.
It does.
It's and we don't teach. Again, I'm not trying to knock the education system here again, but you know, we don't teach people how to truly think and how to truly do introspection at all. You know, to think about who you are and what you believe and what you want to do, because I'm not saying this, again, I'm not saying this is all social media's or technology's fault, but that's a big piece of it. We get all of our or most of our feedback on who we are or what we think we should be through TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, whatever the social media platform of the day is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 You know, I was thinking as you were talking, self-awareness is such a key, but it's being honest with yourself. It's being able to be honest with yourself. And that's hard. That's hard to look in a mirror. So
confidence, is it built through preparation or identity first?
That's an interesting question. You build your confidence while you're building your identity. How about that for an answer?
Okay.
And
That's
think
good.
about it. Look, we all have imposter syndrome, right?
Yeah, well, absolutely.
I mean, some people who are really self-assured are probably kidding themselves anyway. But you know, probably we all have imposter syndrome. So, you know, part of it is admitting you have imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. But even if the more you learn, like, you know, I give talks all the time, and people have come up and said, have you ever given that talk before? And what I usually say is, I've never given that talk before, but I've given chunks of it 100 times. Mm-hmm. So really, it's putting in the reps. Yeah. You know, if you want to be a good public speaker, you got to put in the reps. Mm-hmm. You know, because we're all going to be nervous. Aren't you nervous when you get in front of a class?
Chip, and people think that I'm kidding. All right, I'm 100% serious. The very first time I got up in front of a group of people to speak, I threw up. Today, I've
in front of them or backstage?
Yes, in front of them. Like,
oh my goodness!
And I speak for a living, whether I'm teaching in front of a class or whether I'm standing on a stage or whether I'm coaching, what have you. And honest to God truth, I am nervous every single time. Now, what I'm nervous about now is very different than what I was nervous about 30 years ago, right? 30 years ago, I was worried about what? I was worried about sounding stupid, looking bad, people not liking me, this, that, and the other thing. Now I'm nervous about, am I giving the audience what they need or want to hear? Am I
providing value?
Value, right. So, yeah. I mean, if you look at you know, pick any sport, you know, when the players go into a game, are they nervous? Absolutely. Even the best players, greatest players of all time, right?
There's a course that I teach with a couple of people called Leadership Series, and it's a 3-year leadership course for a company. There's a company that is in the construction business, and they're a pretty big company. But anyway, so Leadership Series 1 is all about self-leadership, you know, being authentic and that kind of thing. Leadership Series 2 is all about public facing, and public speaking is a definite part of it. And we do this thing in there called 5-minute stories, where everybody has to get up and tell a 5-minute story. Can be any kind of story that they want, but it usually the best ones are the ones that come from the heart and
Right.
you know, speak of lived experience and that kind of stuff. And somebody asked me the other day, "Are you nervous when you speak?" And I said, the night before I start the new leadership series, I can't sleep because everything's spinning around in my head. And when I get up, it's you know, I guess courage is being nervous and doing it anyway.
Doing it anyway.
You know, so that's so important. Is we all are nervous, and if you're not nervous, I'd really start to worry.
Exactly. You know, if you've put the reps in, if you put the work in beforehand, you know, once you get going, the nerves go away. But you have to be you want to make sure that you're giving your best to them, and you're providing the most value to them, and that you've done it. If you haven't done the reps, if you haven't done the preparation, well, then you really should be nervous. Like
The best advice, and I'm sure you give this advice as well, but the best advice that I ever heard, and I give it all the time, is stand in front of a mirror and give your talk.
Mm-hmm.
You get instant feedback on what you look like.
Right.
But even better, we have a production studio in our pockets.
Right.
And if you set it up, all you have to do, God, you buy a tripod for $20 off of eBay or off of Amazon, and set this up in front of you and record yourself and listen to yourself back. Mm-hmm. Wow. You know, nobody's going to be a tougher critic than we are we?
No.
You know, and if you've got a coach who can take a look at that video, even better.
Right.
Because they're going to pick up things that you're not. But you know, you're going to be your own worst critic, and so take advantage of that. I think there was a guy that I worked with years ago that got so mad at himself when he couldn't hit a shot on the golf course. He played 3 times a year. And he was so mad because he was a great athlete, and there's no way that he should have been able to screw up on the golf course, and he always screwed up, and he was so mad. Mm. That applies to speaking too.
It does.
You know, putting in the reps, doing the work, and doing the work. You know, the one thing I'm sure you've seen it is death by PowerPoint, right?
Oh God, yes.
I mean, do PowerPoints drive you a little bit nuts?
They drive me a whole lot nuts.
So what about PowerPoints drive you a little bit nuts?
Well, first off, there's way too many words. They don't match. Or there's way too many words, and whoever's talking is reading off the slides. Number 2, whatever's on the slide doesn't match with what's being said. There's mistakes. There's misspellings. They look awful. You can't see them. There's all kinds of things that literally drive me nuts. But the biggest one is there's too much on the slide, and the whoever's talking is reading directly from the slide.
Drives you crazy, right?
Yep.
Do you know the stuff or don't you?
Right. That's it.
You know, and have you put in the time to know the stuff? I love TED Talks, and I love the way TED Talks are talked about, and I love the way that they talk about doing the graphics and the PowerPoints, because the PowerPoints are all pictures with that are illustrative in some way. Mm-hmm. My favorite TED Talk is Brene Brown, and she did a TED Talk in 2010 that is still blowing up the internet. It's like 25 million views or something like that, and it was just so well done. Such a personal story, spoken from the heart. You could tell she wasn't reading from a script, and it was just a great TED Talk. I was going to talk about self-awareness for a second. One of the things that we were talking about is, when you were a kid, were you told big boys don't cry?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So most of us come from that background, mm-hmm. where, it's rub a little dirt on it, or, just suck it up. My wife used to say, I'm going to break off your arm and beat you with the bloody end of it. Things like that. And we weren't allowed to show emotion. We weren't supposed to show emotion, which has led to a whole bunch of really emotionally stunted people.
Right.
And so much of self-awareness is emotion and understanding an emotion. And speaking of Brene Brown, that's what made me think of it, is she wrote in a book called Dare to Lead, she wrote that we're all emotionally illiterate. And her test was, if you cannot come up with 25 words for emotion in a minute, you're emotionally illiterate. Well, speaking of communication, we don't have the vocabulary to talk about emotion. And yet, do you know how many words for emotion there are in the English language?
How many?
672.
Wow.
Yes. And 70% are negative, which tells you a whole another
That's
story.
a different story. That's a
Right. But think about it. There are 672 words for emotion, and we can't think of 25. In fact, when I do this with groups, the most I ever hear is, well, the most I've ever heard is 18. Most of them are around 10 or 11. And then they run out of things to talk for emotion. Well, so much of self-awareness is bound up in being able to understand your emotions. And I even talk about emotions in physical terms. So if you, well, I'll ask you, think about the last time you were really angry. And Tim, I know you're a pretty chill guy, and you probably never get angry, but think about the last time you were really angry. Where in your body did you feel that anger?
Oh, my neck and shoulders. See how quick I came up with that?
Yeah. And if that emotion has a shape, what shape is it?
Ooh. Probably a ball. Probably a tense ball.
Okay. And if the emotion has a color, what color is it?
Red.
And the emotion has a temperature, what temperature is it?
It's hot. It's hot.
And if it has a texture, what texture is it?
Rough.
What you just did is you just explained a emotion in physical terms.
Mm-hmm.
And you're able to do that because of the way that the brain is constructed, and because the way the hormones fly, and they plug into cells that give you a physical sensation of anger. And we can do that with every emotion, whether it be love or sadness or disgust or contempt or any of those, or joy. When you think of something that gave you joy, maybe it was when you got married, or maybe it was when you got divorced. Maybe it was, maybe it was when the birth of your first child. Something that just gave you unbounding joy, and you start to think back on it, and you think exactly what the physical manifestation of it was. Well, that really comes to self-awareness. Mm-hmm. And if we can take the time to, first of all, understand that we are emotional beings as much as we want to be logical. Our emotions show at least 5 seconds before our logic shows. And some people are just a lot better at backing into logic through the emotion, but they're still emotional creatures. There's been a huge amount of research that's done by Dan Ariely, and a bunch of others that talks about how emotions betray ourselves before we even back into logic. And I don't care if you're the flittiest engineer, you make emotional decisions.
Yes.
And if we understand what those emotions are and the way that they factor into the decisions we make, that's real self-awareness.
That's amazing. Yeah, I spoke with her name's Andrea Vitz a couple weeks ago, and she talked about emotional sobriety. And being able to,
that's a term I haven't heard.
It's fascinating.
Is that being willing to admit you have emotions?
Well, and even deeper than that, coming from the whole idea of addictions, from not having emotions to having emotions, acknowledging them, understanding them, and dealing with them in real time. It's Chip, I'm telling you, fascinating conversation. I've had two eye-opening, fascinating conversations in the last 3 months. That was one of them.
Wow. That's pretty cool. I've never heard that term before, but I'm going to look it up.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. I'll send you her contact information too. And
please do. Yeah.
It's funny that we got connected through my brother-in-law. My brother-in-law goes to her husband's gym, and that's anyway. I can't remember specifically, but that's how that contact happened. Yeah, it's just really kind of blew me away. Fascinating. But anyway, I'll send you her contact information. But
I'd really appreciate that.
Oh, no worries. For anybody that's listening right now who realizes they've been approaching communication all wrong, which should be 95% of us, and they're ready to change things, where can they connect with you and start to get that next version of who they want to become?
Yeah, and you'll probably put a lot of the links in the show notes, so I won't belabor that. I've got 2 books out that are Small Decisions, Big Shifts. It's on Amazon. It's on a number of audiobook platforms, Spotify, audiobooks.com. I have another book that came out in March called Every Dog Has Its Day, which is Reflections on Life, Love, and the Lathe, which is, you never hear life, love, and lathe all in the same sentence. So, that's kind of an oddity, but I really love that book. And I've got another one coming out in October called Handoffs, which is a succession fable about family business. So I'm looking forward to that one.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Chip. Chip, I love this conversation. We could probably go on for another 2-3 hours on this, but thank you so much. I think we could, but
I think people would be really bored with that. Don't you think, Tim?
Yeah,
I think we'd have a good time.
We'd be fine. Everybody else, I don't know. But Chip, thanks so much for spending some time with us today. I really do appreciate it, bud.
Thank you very much.
Talk to you soon. Be sure to visit speakingwithconfidencepodcast.com to get your free ebook, Top 21 Challenges for Public Speakers and How to Overcome Them. You can also register for the Forming for Public Speaking course. Always remember, your voice has the power to change the world. We'll talk to you next time. Take care.